Good Monday afternoon to you. 4 o'clock, time for Sports4CLE. Thanks for joining us. Hope you had a great weekend. Plenty of Browns to talk about straight ahead. We told you Friday that wide receivers coach Chad O'Shea interviewed for the Jets offensive coordinator's position. Today, Chad O'Shea is interviewing for the vacant Ravens offensive coordinator position. So one of the Browns offensive coaches in demand, trying to move up to become an offensive coordinator. Let's welcome in Jeff Risdon from BrownsWire.com. Jeff, whenever you have coaches that have the ability to move up, it's usually a good thing, and it shows that the Browns offense is well thought of around the NFL.
Absolutely, and the fact that it's coming from the wide receiver room, most people probably would tell you that the Browns wide receiver room is the weakest part of their offense. And look, O'Shea I think O'Shea has done a fine job at what he does. He's been around the league long enough. He's bounced around. He's coached he's been a quarterback's coach in his career. He's been a tight ends coach in his career. Now doing the wide receivers. He's qualified, and I think one of the things that we get hung up on, and it's especially true at the next level when you're going to be from a coordinator to a head coach. So it's a very different job, and it's a different job from being a position coach to being a coordinator and running an entire unit. And I think O'Shea's background and experience give him a good shot, and that's one of the reasons why he's considered for it. Maybe if Browns fans don't necessarily think that he's done the best job with the wide receiving room, there's certainly room for improvement with the wide receiving core and what they've done. But I think Donovan Peoples-Jones has matured nicely.
Yep, I would agree, absolutely.
I think you saw him integrate Amari Cooper in fairly well from a style of offense. So there's some ability there. And look, it sounds just the fact that he's getting multiple offers, or not offers, but multiple interviews with different teams. I think that tells you that there is very sincere interest in him around the league, and they're not just picking his brain about the Browns. I know I heard a little bit of that. That the Ravens would, they just want to get the inside out and skinny on what's going on in Cleveland. I think they have a pretty good idea of that already. I think they're genuinely interested in hiring those guys.
Yeah, I would agree, and it's just it's a good thing for the Browns offense without question. All right, now you do BrownsWire.com. You also are the managing editor for LionsWire.com, which brings me to your knowledge of what the Browns got in defensive coordinator Jim Schwartz. I know you know him. I know you know him well. What are the Browns getting with Jim Schwartz?
They are getting a no-nonsense, got to be politically safe for work here, butt kicker. He is a motivator extraordinaire. He's a guy who's going to let you know if you're not doing something right, and you're going to know that you're not doing something right. He is not the greatest player development guy. He's not the greatest tactician, although I think he's pretty good at it. He's really good at getting the most out of guys who respond to him, and he's got a way of understanding. He gets a little bit of a bad rep for being like sort of cross and maybe not necessarily cerebral. He's a brilliant guy. If you talk to him off the field about things other than football, you're going to see like, wow, this guy graduated from Georgetown near the top of his class. He's a very, very bright guy. He is analytically driven. He was one of the forerunners of that, actually. When he was in Detroit, he was a little ahead of his time in terms of using analytics and incorporating that into your game plan. But he's a guy, and what I like most about it is he's going to be a guy that is not going to sit idly if something bad is happening. He's going to take action for it. He's going to. So
it sounds kind of
like
some
reaction to it. He's going to be proactive. We haven't seen that necessarily out of the Browns coaches or some of the other guys. I think you're seeing a guy that's going to have a more proactive influence on Kevin Stefanski and on the Browns defense. I think it's needed. I think he's a jolt of energy, both positive and negative, that can sort of balance out where the franchise is at, because they're sort of listless is sort of the sense that you get in watching their defense. And I think he's going to give them a real identity and something that the players on there can embrace and wrap their fingers around and say, yeah, I got this, coach, let's go.
The thing that you hear from people that have played for him, communicates well, tells you what he expects, but you better give him what he when you have discussions, he's going to hold you accountable.
Oh, 100%. And he's very big on that. And he's one of the guys. He didn't like when he had some interesting character. He would coach Ndamukong Suh, who is a notoriously truculent player, very incredibly talented guy, still is, by the way, but is not the easiest guy to get along with. And they found a way to make it work because they had the same goal. And I think if you realize that Jim Schwartz, if you're a player, he's trying to get you to be the best player possibly that you can be, and that out of that will come winning. You're really going to like Jim Schwartz. If you're somebody that's going to take it personally and think that, he just is, hating on me because I'm, not doing this right, or I'm not his guy, that's probably not going to work too well. From what I know of the Browns guys that are in that locker room now, I don't think that's going to be much of an issue, but it is something that you have to look for when you're bringing guys in, specifically in the draft and free agency, because he is not the best coach for everyone. We learned that in Detroit. You saw that in Buffalo the year that he was there. He's great with some guys, but there are guys that are going to get repelled by that. And I think the Browns are going to be able to sort that out pretty quickly. That's one of the things with Jim Schwartz. You always know where you stand with him. And you'll find that out very quickly, too. He is not a guy that gives up on first impressions easily. That's actually one of the ways that I got to know him pretty well. So I made a good first impression on him, and it helped me. There were some others in the Detroit media that didn't so much, and he kind of gave them the cold shoulder, and they treat him a little bit differently. So for all of you guys in the media out there, be a little careful with Jim Schwartz. So far, so good, but keep your eyes open.
All right. When we look at this past weekend's games, how close do you think the Browns are to getting there, or being the divisional round and the conference and beyond? And how far away do you think they are?
I watched those games, and specifically the ones yesterday. I think when you watch what Cincinnati did and you watch what San Francisco did, Browns can do those things. Like, they're capable of doing that when they're healthy, when they're playing well, and together, controlling the middle of the field. That obviously you've got to get better. This is where the Jim Schwartz angle comes in. You've got to be able to control the middle of the field, specifically on the line of scrimmage, on the defensive side of the ball. I think that all four teams that won did very well at doing that, at dominating the defensive interior presence. Was a huge asset this weekend, and that's where the Browns have to get better. But in terms of, like, Deshaun Watson can hang with those quarterbacks that we saw. Joe Burrow, obviously, is probably an exception. I think Joe Burrow was just fantastic. But you've got the pieces in place to compete with these.
Yeah, I would.
The pieces are there. They're not that far away, but it also feels like, man, they've got to get these things better. Otherwise, it's just not going to work very well.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with you. And Joe Burrow, he's going to be a pain in Browns fans' behinds for a number of years. All right, this is something you don't want to see, but since we're on the subject, longest streak of seasons active without a conference championship game appearance. And unfortunately for you, Jeff, the Browns and the Lions are both on these. 30 years since the Browns have been in a conference championship game. Back in 1989, it was one of the 2 years Bud Carson was the head coach, his first year as head coach. It's been a while. I'm stunned it's been that long, but it has been a struggle since they've been back in 99.
It really has been, and you think back, that's what, 33 years with the missing seasons. Now, I remember, and that was my senior year of high school. I can't believe that it's been that long since they were in a championship game, and the misery that is my lot in life of covering the Lions and the Browns and not getting to cover a playoff game in a very long time it's frustrating. I was so grateful for the win that we got. And again, that's why I really do think that they're close, but man, they got to get there quick, because I'm not getting any younger. And that list was, quite frankly, embarrassing. It was tough to watch. The cool thing about it, though, look at the Dallas Cowboys and the Miami Dolphins out there. Those were like two of the most prominent teams for a better part of that time. Miami sort of fell off, but Dallas remains, America's team. They haven't won in a very long time either. Look, I don't root against anybody, but I'm not sad that they lost and extended their streak either.
Yeah, just to because you're making me feel old, I was covering the Browns in 88 and 89, so I'm a little bit older. Jeff Risdon and I are going to step aside, take a quick time out. We'll head to the voicemail of Truth and Reason. Sports for CLE. We'll be right back. Stay with us. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program recognizes role model students and teachers from across Ohio. Nominations can now be done completely online. To nominate a deserving teacher or student, go to ohiolottery.com. In the About section, find Partners in Education. There you will find links to the nomination forms. Students kindergarten through 12th grade can be academic all-stars. Teachers can be honored as a Teacher of the Month. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education, where stars shine.
The Greater Cleveland Sports Hall of Fame celebrates the star athletes and notable sports figures who were born or have made their home in Greater Cleveland. It tells the story of discipline, commitment, perseverance, sportsmanship, and excellence in achievement. It encourages and inspires those who believe in sport and its direct impact on the well-being of our community. Go to clevelandsportshall.com or follow us on Twitter at GCLE Sports HOF for more details.
We continue talking Browns with Jeff Risdon from BrownsWire.com. Let's head to the voicemail of Truth and Reason.
Hello, it's me, Nolan, again. I just wanted to know a trade that the Browns get for a tight end number 2. We already have Harrison Bryant. You know, David Njoku's already unlocked. I was thinking of a free big agent name, like Jordan Atkins out there for the Texans. He's been pretty productive this season. Another name that comes to mind is Janal Everett. I love him in the Chargers. He was a very good productive tight end, too. Another one is Irv Smith from the Vikings. I like a lot of stuff about him. I liked him as a player in college. And I just wanted to know y'all's thoughts on which tight end or what we should get. Thank you. Bye.
As always, appreciate all of the voicemails. Jeff, all the guys he mentioned are pretty good. Aikens played with Deshaun. Everett's been pretty good. I think they're going to be playing more 3-wide receiver sets, so I don't know that they necessarily will try to get another free agent tight end. I'd rather see him go and upgrade the wide receiver position pretty significantly.
Yeah, I would feel the same way. There are good tight ends out there, and it's also a case. Irv Smith is an interesting one because he missed most of the season. He actually got injured. That's why the Vikings made their trade to get T.J. Hockenson in, so he could be a bargain basement guy. Like you sign him this offseason, and okay. He's hopefully he can send a bleeding deal, but that's the type of a tight end that I think you're going to get in here. I'd actually like to see them get a blocking tight end more than another receiving style of tight end. I think that's something that you can use a little bit better. But yeah, I'm with you. We've got to get better wide receivers in this room. Specifically, just guys that are reliably open in the intermediate range, because that's where Deshaun does. That's where he's at his best. And right now, that doesn't match up with where the Browns wide receivers are working at their best. So they've definitely got to improve the wide receiving room. And getting a running back that can catch out of the backfield. If Kareem isn't back, if the dynamics change there, that's something that they have to look at as well.
All right, along those lines, let's take a look. 4 veteran wide receivers the Browns could target in a trade. This is from Dog Pound Daily. Number 4, Adam Thielen from the Vikings. Now, there's the Kevin Stefanski tie in there. Still pretty productive. Number 3, Brandon Cooks. Talked about him a little bit. Houston Texans. Doesn't want to be a part of the rebuild. Again, pretty productive. Number 2 is an interesting name. Michael Thomas from the New Orleans Saints has not been able to get on the field for a couple of seasons. And number 1, name we've talked about quite a bit, DeAndre Hopkins of the Arizona Cardinals. Cardinals likely headed for a full-blown rebuild. 2 things. They don't have a lot of draft assets to go and get them. And you would also probably have to maybe extend them, get them some sort of deal that entices them a little bit as well.
Yeah, and the first part that you brought up there is the difficult part. Your teams are going to want to get assets for these trades. DeAndre Hopkins, if you look at what Arizona gave up to get him once upon a time, they're going to want to recoup some of that. This is a team that they are looking at a rebuild, and with Kyler Murray's status uncertain, it makes sense for them to sell. And DeAndre Hopkins, my goodness, my son is a huge Texans fan. He still has a DeAndre Hopkins Texans jersey that he wears proudly. That guy's an amazing receiver, and even though he's 30 years old, he can still get it done. But that you're giving up a whole lot, and those are holes that you're not going to be able to fill elsewhere. That's probably 2 draft picks at minimum that you're giving up. You're already missing so many. It's tough to see that. Brandon Cooks is interesting. I like that idea because I don't think he's going to be as prohibitively expensive, both to acquire and to extend. And you do need to give him a little bit more money too, but you can work that out. He's been good across a wide variety of schemes with a wide variety of quarterbacks. Look at where all he's played in his career. He's seen some things in his NFL days. And this is a guy, he's certainly seen some things in Houston that he doesn't like. That's why he wants out. I don't blame him. That would be the one that I would go after of that group that if you're targeting it. Thielen, look, he's been wonderful, and he's one of the things that doesn't get discussed enough with him. He's a fantastic down-the-field blocker who will help your run game. But he looked like he lost at least a half a step this season, and I don't think that's coming back with his time with the Vikings. So a good player, great locker room guy would certainly be welcomed. But if you're going to give up assets, I want to aim a little bit higher than that. So Cooks out of that group would probably be my favorite of that group.
All right, let's take a look. This is from BrownsWire.com. 4 biggest questions the Browns must answer in 2023, so next season. Number 1, is it the right regime? Is the right regime in place? Number 2, can Nick Chubb handle another season of 300-plus carries? Number 3, will Deshaun Watson look like the Deshaun Watson of old? And will Jim Schwartz fix all of the problems defensively? Those are all pretty valid. I think they're going to be more of a pass-first team. You don't pay a guy $230 million guaranteed to be a run-oriented team. You just don't.
They ran the ball, I believe it was 44% of the time, which was either 7th or 9th. I'm getting numbers transposed in my head. Sorry about that. But they were a top 10 running team. And I do think that they're going to scale back a ways from that a little bit. And just look what we talked about at the start of the show. The teams that are still playing, they had run games, but they're based on passing games. Even San Francisco, what did they do with George Kittle and Brandon Ayuk and those guys? They spread the ball around. I think that's what Stefanski wants to do as well. That's sort of the same, tree from the Shanahan branch of offense. They're going to be able to do that. They have to get better wide receivers at it. But I agree with you. I don't think Nick Chubb getting 300 carries again, that's not a huge worry for me. Corey Kinnan, the editor who wrote that, I actually pushed back with him a little bit on that because I don't think we're going to have to worry about that one. 200, 225 maybe is fine. And I think that will keep Chubb a little bit fresher too. And, I do think they're going to be going more towards using him more judiciously, especially like in the middle of games where, he kind of there's room for that. But, as far as the right regime, that's one I don't think any of us can effectively answer until we see it this coming fall. And the same is true with Jim Schwartz. Look, I'm bullish on Jim Schwartz. I think he's going to help. But if you're relying on a new coordinator to fix the personnel issues, it's not going to work. They have to upgrade the talent, specifically on the defensive line and in the middle of the field right behind it. Now, I do think that a better defensive line is going to help the linebackers and the safeties play better. And I do think that Schwartz is going to get more out of them. But he can't be the magic button. He's not the panacea. He's got to get some help himself. And that's, they're great questions. And that's one of the things that we're going to be talking about. You and I will talk about several times this offseason because we're not going to know until we see it. And that's the fun part of the offseason is that we see different paths to solving some of these questions and which ones do they follow and how does it play out for them. That's the fun of the offseason. I love it. When you cover bad teams, as we unfortunately talked about in the last segment, I do very much. The offseason is a fun time because it gives you positive thoughts this yeah, I see how this can work. And I feel that way about Cleveland right now. This is a team. They're on the precipice of being really good. I really do believe that. But this is a critical offseason, and those questions are good ones.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the right regime, if it's not it means you start all over again, and the cycle of that missing it for 30 how many ever years.
And that's
continues.
So hard because the new regime is saddled with a quarterback.
Yep.
And not that being saddled with Deshaun Watson is the worst thing in the world, but he's not going to be for everybody, whether it's the off the field stuff or whether it's his playing style. He doesn't fit every offense, and that's, then you're tailoring your next regime if you have to make a change to who can work with a quarterback, and that's not a good way to go up business. I think we've seen why regimes fail in Cleveland pretty well. One of them is trying to make pieces fit that shouldn't be fitting together, and that's a bad way. So let's certainly hope that first question gets answered resolutely yes, that this is the right regime. I think it is, but I don't feel as confident as I did 24 months ago.
Yeah.
I think that's a fair assessment.
I would agree with you wholeheartedly. Jeff Risdon from BrownsWire.com and I are going to step aside, take a quick time out. Other side of the break, we'll talk a little bit about defense and what pieces the Browns need to add. Sports4CLE will be right back. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
We continue talking Browns with Jeff Risdon from BrownsWire.com. So, Jeff, pretty much agreed defensive line, linebacker, wide receiver, possibly free safety, the areas that need to be addressed most pressingly for the Browns. Which areas do you think they're likely to go veteran free agency because you need them fixed pretty much now?
That's defensive tackle. I see them bringing in at least one and a higher end one. Again, I wrote about this at Browns Wire when they hired Schwartz. His defenses, when they work well, have not one, not two, but three really good linemen. Myles Garrett's great. You got to get the other two, and preferably they're inside. The starting defensive tackles for the 2023 Cleveland Browns are not currently on the roster. If they are, it's not going to work with Jim Schwartz. I have no hesitation in saying that right now. They've got to go out and get that, and they got to get guys that can play right away. So that is where you address with your veteran dollars, and you hope that your coaching staff can coach up some young. You're probably going to draft one late too. When Schwartz was in Detroit and when he was also in Philadelphia, they did a really good job of hitting on late round guys who could be functional backups, depths. That's something that Cleveland's going to have to hit on as well. But you've got to. You cannot spare expenses for the defensive line with Jim Schwartz as your coordinator. Otherwise, again, you're setting him up to fail. That's just not where this team is at. So I would go there. Drafting, I think you can get a safety. It's not a great safety class from what I've seen. Starting to do draft prep as I head down to the Senior Bowl next week. Safety classes, it's okay. I think you can get some linebackers in this class on day 3 that will fit in very nicely. So and pass rushers too. If you can get just a designated pass rusher, Schwartz can make that work. You don't have to have an all-world guy. You don't have to have a guy like Clowney. You can get, and I will say this, I'm optimistic that Chase Winovich, if he's back, can thrive under Jim Schwartz. That's one that I would be looking at to as a guy who could possibly break out again if he comes back.
All right. Along those lines, we're going to take a look at some free agents. This is the highest-ranked free agent on their team, according to Pro Football Focus. So we're going to look at some defensive tackles. We start Zach Allen, 72.9, free agency ranked 23rd overall. Texans, Okorano, 75.1. You saw not ranked in terms of how many the top 50 played 517 snaps. A guy that flashed a little bit in the playoffs for the Jaguars, Arden Key, 81.3. Only played 475 snaps. And then a guy who's been around a little bit longer, Sheldon Rankins for the Jets, 73.1. Not on that list is Deron Payne as well. Do any of those guys jump out and kind of catch your attention as folks that might work out?
Yeah, Zach Allen is an interesting one because he can play multiple spots. He can play your 3 technique. He can play a little bit wider if you ask him to.
All right, so Zach,
you can kind of over your wide 9 guys, so he can fit there. Zach Allen's interesting. Sheldon Rankins, there's so many injuries with that guy. I would pass on that one. Another guy that I would bring up that just missed the Jim Schwartz time in Detroit is Ashawn Robinson from the Rams. He is a guy that is an absolute perfect central casting guy for Jim Schwartz to be your number 3 defensive tackle. He is a no nonsense. He's not going to rush the passer. He might stumble into a half sack along the way, but you will not move him backwards. And that's something that's very big. That's the kind of caliber of guy that you sign as a lower end free agent, and he certainly fits. And but again, that's another guy that's had some injury issues over time. So you're not necessarily breaking the bank there. Deron Payne, Javon Hargrave, if the Eagles are somehow foolish enough to let him go, those are your primary targets that you go after. Those are the guys that Schwartz can turn into a very effective defensive line.
all right, let's take a look at some linebackers. And again, they may opt to go in terms of the draft, but one that jumps out is David Long. It's a guy that little undersized that Jim Schwartz mentioned in his presser as being an undersized guy who can thrive in his system. 76.2 his grade, 12th overall, Pro Football Focus. From the Buccaneers, another guy that was in the playoffs, Levante David, 84.1, a little bit bigger guy. You see 7th Pro Football Focus. And then from the Eagles, so another guy to kind of listen out for him this weekend as he's playing. T.J. Edwards, 84.8. You see all those snaps that he played, Pro Football Focus ranking 24. Of those guys, who do you think fits that system and could help the Browns?
Obviously, Long does because he's played for Schwartz. But T.J. Edwards is a fantastic – the Eagles drafted Levante David specifically to play the role that T.J. Edwards is in. And T.J. Edwards was like, no, rookie, that's my gig, and played fantastic. So there's the guy that he has that drive that Jim Schwartz is going to look for and to have in his favor. So both of those guys make a lot of sense. Whichever one comes cheaper, you can't skip on it, but it is one where you've got to prioritize money elsewhere. The linebacking core that's in place is not dreadful. Like you can make it work, but getting an augment of one of those guys, like again, Long is probably the preferable one. Levante David has been a fantastic linebacker for a very long time, but that's sort of the reason why you don't chase him is that he's been around a very long time.
All right, now this is we're going to take a look at some of the safeties. This is assuming they don't think that John Johnson can play that single high free safety that might be required here. Packers, Rudy Ford, a 77.7 Pro Football Focus grade. You see the snaps, didn't play a ton. Colts, Rodney McLeod, 80.1, played significantly more. Steelers, DeMonte Kazee, again, didn't play a whole lot, 273 snaps. And this name is going to be a little bit more familiar. Jimmy Ward of the San Francisco 49ers, Pro Football Focus grade 76.1. Any of those catch your ear? Or do you think JJ3 can play the single high safety effectively enough?
I would like to see them let him try and see if Jim Schwartz can coax out of him what we all thought we were going to get from JJ3, and it just unfortunately hasn't been there nearly often enough. But yeah, DeMonte Kazee is an interesting one. He's a guy that can play. He can play as your slot corner as well. He's sort of that feisty guy. I think he's good. McLeod has history. He played under Schwartz in Philadelphia for some time. That's a guy. He never gets acclaim. He's always in the right spot. Not necessarily the biggest playmaker or anything, but that's a guy. He's just a very good football player. And either one of those guys, again, I want competition. I want insurance against JJ3 not being the guy. But I kind of think JJ3 is going to work out. I really do. Fingers crossed on that.
Jeff Risden, BrownsWire.com, as always. Great stuff. Thanks so much for the time and the insight. Appreciate it very much, Jeff.
Thanks. Go Cavs.
All right, Jeff Risden, BrownsWire.com. Make sure you check him out. We're going to step aside, take a quick time out. We continue talking Browns. Scott Petrak, Browns beat reporter from the Illyria Chronicle Telegram, as well as BrownsZone.com. Straight ahead. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program recognizes role model students and teachers from across Ohio. Nominations can now be done completely online. To nominate a deserving teacher or student, go to OhioLottery.com. In the About section, find Partners in Education. There you will find links to the nomination forms. Students, kindergarten through 12th grade, can be academic all-stars. Teachers can be honored as a Teacher of the Month. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education, where stars shine.
I am powerful beyond my wildest imagination.
I will define my future.
I will keep challenging myself to improve.
Because I am a future leader of this great nation.
I will be responsible for raising a beautiful family.
And educating not only my generation, but many more to come.
I will make a difference in my community.
And I will stand up for what I believe in.
I will not settle for simply chasing my dreams. I will achieve them.
Because I was given a chance.
An opportunity.
A home.
At Family, Career, and Community Leaders of America.
The ultimate leadership experience.
FCCLA has been one of the greatest experiences of my life.
It's made me who I am today.
Join us. We'll build a new future together.
We continue talking Browns. Let's head to the voicemail of Truth and Reason.
Hey guys, I'm Sean Holt out of Plant City, Florida, Brandon, Florida. I'm born and raised in Cleveland. I just have a question about Stefanski. I would love him as a head coach, but I'd rather get a offensive coordinator just because his play calling is kind of stagnant and predictable. I just want to know your thoughts on that. Go Browns. Love y'all show too.
Appreciate the voicemails as usual. Let's welcome in Scott Petrak, the Illyria Chronicle Telegram, as well as BrownsZone.com. Scott, I think this year will be very important for Kevin Stefanski. Keep in mind, he hasn't had, quote unquote, his quarterback calling plays. I know Baker Mayfield was the number one overall pick, but you're still calling plays around a what isn't your guy, for lack of a better way of describing it.
Yeah, I think that's huge, Dave. And you finally get, Deshaun Watson, you would expect for a full season next year. And I think that would be the first really fair test of Kevin Stefanski as a play caller. And the fact is, I think he's done fine in his first 3 years. He can quibble with certain things, with certain specific play calls. I think you can quibble with a couple of games, right? He was outcoached or they were outcoached by the Dolphins or by the Patriots. But overall, I think he's got a solid system. I think he's a good play caller. I mean, you saw him score a bunch of points with Baker Mayfield, a limited Baker Mayfield, in 2020, right? You saw him win games with Case Keenum, almost win a game with Nick Mullins, win games with Jacoby Brissett, and should have won more if your defense and special teams play better. So, his play calling is not at the top of my list of concerns when it comes to this team.
I would agree with you wholeheartedly. This is from your mailbag. Do you think Kevin Stefanski deserved another year?
Yeah, I answer that by saying I don't know if deserved is the right word because, they didn't make the playoffs the last 2 years and had, under 500 records, losing records with talented rosters. Having said that, I would not have made a change. If I were Jimmy Haslam or Andrew Berry or Paul DePodesta, whoever's making that final decision, I think Stefanski should be brought back. We talked about Deshaun Watson already. I think that's a big piece of this is seeing how Stefanski and Watson not coexist, but how they work together and if they can become a big-time offense with what you think is a big-time quarterback. So, yeah, he's got deficiencies, but in my opinion, none of the deficiencies to this point would have required him to be fired.
I would agree. The other thing I would point out, and I found this interesting, I saw it yesterday, Zach Taylor was 6-25-1 in his first 2 seasons in Cincinnati. He took him to the Super Bowl last year, and he's back in the AFC Championship. Now, I get it, Joe Burrow, but that goes back to our thing about what you consider to be an elite quarterback.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I'll tell you what, Zach Taylor, we saw him up close twice a year, since he's been the head coach. And I never was overwhelmed by him or even impressed by him. I was like, okay, it's just a guy. But then you go to a Super Bowl, you look like you could go to another Super Bowl, you win a bunch of games, Joe Burrow develops. Now, a lot of that's Joe Burrow. You get blessed with, a top, 2, 3, 4 quarterback in the league. That goes a long way. But my opinion on Zach Taylor has started to change, especially yesterday. I thought the plan that they had going into Buffalo, the way they handled Buffalo was really impressive, and you can't just take that away from the head coach. He deserves credit for that.
Yeah, down 3 starting offensive linemen as well. So in that context, again, that was a good job by them. Do you think the current regime doesn't value interior defensive linemen, and will that change now that Jim Schwartz is the offensive coordinator? Again, this is from your mailbag. I kind of twisted it.
Yeah, I would say yes and yes.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at the first 3 years with Andrew Berry's GM, they would sign Andrew Billings to a 1-year contract, and then Malik Jackson to a 1-year contract, Taven Bryan to a 1-year contract. And they're modest deals, right? Nobody's breaking the bank. The highest draft pick spent on D-tackle was a 3rd rounder in Jordan Elliott. So there weren't any big-time resources spent at that position, and I think there was a reason for that. They would say, okay, we're not going to neglect D-tackle, but it's not going to be a priority like defensive end, like corner, like offensive line. I think that changes with Jim Schwartz because Schwartz made it obvious in his press conference and just throughout his career how much he relies on a dominant front 4 for his defense to be successful. He says that's the way you beat teams is by getting a pass rush with your front 4. Then you control when you blitz, you take pressure off the coverage, and you can't do that with just Myles Garrett. And you can't even do that with Myles Garrett and another big-time end. You need the guys in the middle, especially if you play that wide technique, right, where the ends are outside the tackle or outside the tight ends. You need some tackles that can hold up. And I certainly didn't think, Jordan Elliott and Taven Bryan and Tommy Togiai and Perry Winfrey did that this year. So I think there needs to be an influx, and I think that's something Jim Schwartz, if he already hasn't, will make abundantly clear that better be a priority in this offseason.
Yeah, I would imagine those conversations happen during the interview process, but you never know.
Sure.
All right, again, this is from your mailbag. What do you think they do at defensive end and defensive tackle then?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because you don't have a first-round pick, right? So you throw that, okay, you could address it that way. Well, can you address it with a pick in the mid-40s? Maybe one of those spots. I think you need 2 D tackles. Maybe 2 new starters, at least one starter to pair with Jordan Elliott or Perry and Winfrey for sure. And then you need a starting end opposite Myles Garrett because Clowney's not going to be back. I don't think you can count on Alex Wright or Isaiah Thomas to be ready. So that means it's 3 guys that are going to be 2 starters and then another rotation guy across that front. And I think it's probably trades and free agency. Maybe you rely on one of those spots for the draft, but that's such first of all, the draft is a crapshoot. You never know who's going to be there. And, if you think you have a roster that's going to compete or needs to compete for the division title, make a run in the playoffs, you can't rely on rookies to come in and do that for you. So I wouldn't be stunned at all if it were 3 veterans through free agency / trades.
Yeah, and again, it needs a massive upgrade. The younger guys might be rotational pieces. You let them fight it out to see who those rotational pieces are going to be. I know you talked to Grant Delpit at the end of the year. Take us through that. You just put the story up today, I think. So take us through Grant Delpit and what you found out.
Yeah, to me, it was kind of an interesting, arc to his season, right? At the beginning, he was involved in those secondary breakdowns, right? You had the one against Carolina in the opener where Robbie Anderson ran by Greg Newsome for the 75-yard touchdown. And then the Browns wound up coming back to win, but that was a big play, and Delpit was the deep safety. Week 2, you had Corey Davis run by Denzel Ward for the 66-yarder as part of that epic collapse, and Delpit was like the closest safety. Yet, I don't think, and he doesn't think that he was the guy responsible there, but he kept his mouth shut. And he heard all the criticism, but he said, hey, it wasn't going to do anybody any good for me to set the record straight. So he just kind of kept to himself, kept playing, and I thought he got much better as the season progressed. He missed some tackles early in the run game. I thought he did a better job late. Wasn't perfect, but did a better job. You could see him show up in the run game as he played more in the box. Then he had 3 interceptions over the last 3 weeks, 1 against New Orleans, 2 against Washington. And to me, I didn't think he showed he's a Pro Bowler, but I think he earned another year as a starter, right? And I think people question that. I don't know if the Browns ever questioned that, but I certainly was questioning it at some point. Now I think he's earned the right to come back and start. And I think in Jim Schwartz's scheme, he'll be in the box more. You'll see him show up as a run defender. And he thinks he brings a physical presence. He kind of joked about how tackling, he slid in the draft because he didn't tackle well in his last year at LSU. Missed, I think it was 20 tackles. That was a knock on him. And it never sat well with Delpit because he had a high ankle sprain and he played through it. And he thought that's why he missed a bunch of the tackles. So he thinks he kind of proved something, but he wasn't getting carried away. He said there were ups and downs. He said just like the defense, he needs to start faster next year. But I just think he's a guy that there's such high expectations. He looks like a stud. He's big, he's fast, 2nd-round draft pick. And a lot of guys say big things about him. And I think we started to see him live up to that potential as the season went along.
Keep in mind, though, a ruptured Achilles is just rough to come back from. So that's another thing. He's probably a couple years removed from that. He might be back to 100%. I know you also talked to former Browns defensive lineman Robert Smith about Jim Schwartz. What do you have to say about that and that offense, or defense, rather?
Yeah, Robert is one of my all-time favorites. So I was glad to be able to, connect with him again because he had valuable, I thought, insight into Jim Schwartz. And he just echoed the importance of the defensive line and how that's something that Schwartz relies on. He said you cannot ignore the D tackles. They're such a big piece of this defense. And he thought that Schwartz will press Andrew Berry to go get new D tackles. He thinks Myles Garrett, I think he said scary is how he could be in this scheme. He said, well, how many sacks has he had? I said, well, he has 16 the last 2 years. He goes, I see him getting 20 without thinking about it. He just thinks he can excel because the scheme is, he said, you just let loose. Schwartz wants his players let loose. He wants them to play, doesn't want them to think too much. And I think that's what Myles Garrett's dying to do, right? Just go get the quarterback coming off the edge wide. The wider you get, he thinks it makes it tougher to double team Myles, which we see him double teamed more than anybody in the league. So he just thinks it's a great fit for him. And then the key is to go find the pieces around Myles Garrett to make the front four like the rest of the front four Schwartz has had throughout his career.
Yeah, and I think letting loose is what a lot of those defensive players want. They just want to be let loose and to get after it. Scott Petrick and I are going to step aside, take a quick timeout. Other side of the break, we will talk more about free agency and the Browns upgrading this roster. Sports for Sale. We'll be right back. Stay with us. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program recognizes role model students and teachers from across Ohio. Nominations can now be done completely online. To nominate a deserving teacher or student, go to ohiolottery.com. In the About section, find Partners in Education. There you will find links to the nomination forms. Students, kindergarten through 12th grade, can be academic all-stars. Teachers can be honored as a Teacher of the Month. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education, where stars shine. We continue talking Browns with Scott Petrak from the Elyria Chronicle-Telegram as well as brownzone.com. Scott, again, this one from your mailbag. How many of Andrew Berry's draft picks do you think will be let go before the start of the 2023 season?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting one. You know, I would expect most of the guys, if not all of them, to get another chance to at least compete in a training camp, right? Like, I don't think Andrew Berry's in any hurry to cut Anthony Schwartz or, you know, a guy like Jordan Elliott or whoever, Jacob Phillips, just because, you know, you can keep them on the 90-man roster. That's no skin off your back. But making the actual team, like Dimitri Felton, to me, he could be a guy that gets cut at some point in the offseason. I just think he hasn't shown that he can play at this level. And he was a healthy scratch throughout the season, despite, you know, the Browns not being super deep at receiver. They didn't think he could return kicks, so they went out and got replacements there. So to me, he's not going to make the team next year. You know, Tommy Togiai, I think, is on that list of, you know, unlikely to make the team. He was a healthy scratch at the end of this year, and we just talked about how weak the defensive tackle position was. Anthony Schwartz, I think he'll get a chance in camp to try to prove that he belongs, but you certainly cannot go in thinking he's going to be a key contributor. We saw that wasn't the case again this year. So, you know, I know he's a third-round pick. It was only a couple of years. They love his speed. So I think he'll get a chance to stick around. But, you know, is it 50-50 he makes the team? It's probably even not that high. And then Jacob Phillips has to show that he's healthy. But I don't think you can count on him to play a big role just because he hasn't stayed healthy. And when he filled in for Anthony Walker Jr. before he got hurt, I didn't think he played particularly well.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting because I think you're going to see some of the young guys have to produce. And if they don't produce, they're going to kind of move on because they're going to – this has to be the year that you can't – it's not like you can, we'll figure it out. It's got to be this year. This is interesting as well. 2 players the Browns need to re-sign this offseason. This is from Browns Nation. Number 1, Ethan Posick, center. Had a really good year filling in for the injured Nick Harris. And number 2, Anthony Walker. And we've talked about it a couple of times. That run defense suffered greatly when he went down for the season.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, and I'd agree with that order too. I mean, Posick, you know, the only issue there for me is they've invested so much across the line, right? Taylor got an extension, Petonio got an extension, Conklin just got an extension. You have to make a decision on Jed Wills and the, you know, 5th-year option. That, you know, will you pay Posick? I mean, let's say it's $8 million or $10 million. Will you pay him that? That's the only decision there for me. But I think he proved that he's really good. He's obviously more experienced, more proven than Nick Harris. Harris is coming off a serious injury. He's only started 2 games, I think, in his career. So to me, it makes sense to make Posick a priority. And then Walker brings a lot. Number 1, he's a leader, and they missed him in that aspect. They missed him on and off the field when he got injured. And we've talked about the leadership kind of void there, and I think he fills some of that. And then I think he played really well last year. You know, he's not a Pro Bowl guy, but he can play snaps for you. He can play in the middle. He can call defenses. He can play, you know, kind of every down. He can cover. He can stop the run. So I like both those. And the thing is, at linebacker, you have JOK, and then you got a bunch of question marks. And I would bring back Walker and Sione Takitaki, and then maybe add one more guy after that.
Yeah, and again, Walker, I'd be interested to see him play in a Jim Schwartz defense because it relies so much on instinct, and I think that's his strength. I think that's Anthony Walker's strength. I don't think you want him to try to react too much. All right, this again from your mailbag. Possible salary cap cuts that could become available to fill Browns' needs. You got the Eagles defensive end, Brandon Graham, Titans defensive end, Bud Dupree, Rams tight end, Tyler Higbee. Of those, who do you think's most likely? Who do you think fits best?
Yeah, you know what? I'm enamored with Brandon Graham. And who knows how the Eagles, you know, if they win a Super Bowl, do they re-sign everybody? You don't know. But he's got a history of Jim Schwartz, which I think is important, right? It's always helpful to have guys that know the coordinator, know his scheme, know how he coaches, because we know that Schwartz is a fiery guy, right? So maybe Graham, having him, he can say, hey, Miles, you know, this is just who he is. And Robert Smith told me this too. He's a player's coach. He's demanding but patient, but you just want Miles and the rest of the defense to kind of interpret it the right way, right? If he's cussing you out, just kind of give him a break, let him have his say, and just understand that he really wants what's best for you and the team. So I think that's helpful. Plus, I just think he's a really good player. I've always liked Brandon Graham. So that he would be at the top of my list. And then I was just kind of, I found a list of potential cap casualties. And then it's just a position thing. We talked about the need at the end, and I think they could upgrade at that number 2 tight end spot. And Higbee is, he's a good receiver and has been for the Rams. And I think he's an upgrade over, Harrison Bryant.
All right. Before we go to break, 5 free agent safeties the Browns could target in 2023. This from Dog Pound Daily. Taylor Rapp from those Los Angeles Rams. Number 4, Jonathan Owens from the Houston Texans. Number 3, Eric Rowe from the Dolphins. Mike Edwards from the Buccaneers, a familiar name, and Marcus Epps from the Eagles. Let's start here. Do you think John Johnson III can play that single high safety under Jim Schwartz in that defense?
Yeah, I don't know that answer, Dave. I mean, he's never really had to do that with the Rams. They moved him around a lot. He played some in the slot, kind of that nickel position. I think it was I know it was a transition for him when he played more free safety when he arrived in 2021. I don't know. I don't know if he can go sideline to sideline and make all those plays. That's something I'm really curious to see what Schwartz thinks, right? Because if he says no, then you got to go get one. And it has, in my opinion, it has to be a free safety, because I think, although Delpit says he can do both, I think Delpit is better off in the box than playing free. So then you got to go find a free safety. The one you mentioned from the Rams, would you go back-to-back Rams free agents? I don't know about that. I think Rowe and then Epps are interesting because they both have ties to Schwartz. Rowe didn't play for Schwartz, but he was there for his first training camp in Philly, and I read some quotes from him then, and Schwartz made an impression on him. So if you could bring one of those guys in, again, it's kind of the Brandon Graham philosophy, but if a guy that really is familiar with the system that Schwartz counts on and can count on to fill that role, I think would be really important, because that's a big role in this defense. And to me, that's one of the biggest question marks is, do they think Johnson can play that spot?
Scott Petrick and I are going to step aside, take a quick time out. Other side of the break, we'll head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason. Maybe talk a little bit about Lamar Jackson as well. Sports4CLE, be right back. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
We continue talking Browns here on Sports4CLE. Let's head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason.
Yeah, hi, this is Ron from Cleveland, and I was calling in to see what you thought about this question. Do you think, in this day of social media, that a professional team can be influenced enough by opinion to release a coach that they normally wouldn't really want to lose, or maybe was going to give another year? Let me know what you think. Thanks. Bye-bye. Go Browns. Woof.
As always, appreciate all the voicemails. Scott, even though the teams will tell you they don't pay attention to the media or social media, I think they pay attention, but I don't think it influences what their decision is very much.
I think that's a really interesting question. It should not, but I don't know if I'd go as far as saying it doesn't or it never does. I think some owners have rabbit ears and can hear everything. And, back in the day, it would have been talk radio, right? And maybe still is some talk radio. But, where you hear all those opinions and you hear nonstop criticism, and now it's just amplified on social media. Now, I don't think that's the right way to run your organization, and that feels like a small percentage of voices that are the loudest on social media. But, I know that how the fan base perceives things is a concern of most organizations. So I wouldn't say never has an impact, but obviously it should be well down the list of importance.
All right, this is kind of interesting as well. Percentage of Nick Chubb totals compared to the rest of the Browns' offense. You see, in 2018, 19.4% of the yards, 22.7% of the touchdowns. 2019, 32% of the yards. This season, almost 30% of the yards, 34% of the touchdowns. What I would say is that's going to change dramatically because you don't pay a quarterback what the Browns are paying Deshaun Watson to not build an offense around it. Am I missing something there, or do you agree?
No, I agree. And the other half of that is, it's 2022, and we've talked about it, Dave. The Browns believe the passing game is most important. Now, obviously, they believe in the running game. They've invested heavily with Chubb and the offensive line. And their style is more slanted toward the run than most NFL teams. But with Deshaun Watson the whole season, I think it's only natural to expect less of Nick Chubb. But that stat is really interesting. It's like kind of going through a history of the Browns. Your 2018, Hugh Jackson wouldn't use Chubb enough, so then Dorsey had to trade away Carlos Hyde, right? So he gets snaps. Then Freddie wore out Big Chubb in 2019. And then it feels like the last 2 years it was more about the state of the offense. When the offense was clicking, then Chubb doesn't get quite a highest percentage. And then this year the offense struggled, except Chubb still had a great year, so the percentage was higher.
All right, before we go, Ravens offered Lamar Jackson $113 million in guarantees initially before raising it to $133. A source told Ryan Clark, ESPN. There are 6 quarterbacks who make more than $133 million in guarantees. 2 more just under that number. ESPN is reporting some NFL executives believe the Ravens might trade Lamar Jackson if they can't get a deal done instead of tagging him with the intent of keeping him. Can you see that happening? Now, the Ravens, again, they're a very much a their financials are, we're not going to tie up a lot in any one guy.
Yeah, it's interesting. If you're Lamar Jackson, the way the NFL works is the guy that signs latest gets the most money, right? That's always been how it is. So, I don't know if he can expect to get the Deshaun Watson $230 million guaranteed, but I think he would want to come second. And I think that's a legitimate ask for Lamar Jackson, given he's been an MVP, given the importance he has had to that team. And you've seen it the last 2 years down the stretch when they can't win enough games without him. So I think that's where he needs to hold out, is somewhere between Deshaun Watson and then the rest of that guaranteed money. And I could see it reaching a point where the Ravens do try to trade him. The problem I have with that is, like, their offense is set up to be Lamar Jackson. And they don't have the receivers. They don't have, it's all about Lamar Jackson. And I think that would be a really difficult transition unless you got a guy that could fit right in. And there's just not a whole lot of guys out there in the world that could slide right into that offense and be the same. So I guess I'm saying I expect him to come back to Baltimore and they figure it out.
Well, think about this. Do you think, and it's certainly not the primary reason that the Browns guaranteed that contract, $230 million guaranteed. Do you think that was an ancillary thought process because you've got Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, the other guy in this division, is coming up, and I got to imagine it's creating some issues for 2 of the other teams in your division, that contract for Deshaun Watson.
No, there's no doubt. I don't think that went into the thinking. I think it was all about how can we land him, and that was how you would land Deshaun Watson, is by making it fully guaranteed. But I certainly think that is like a happy coincidence for the Browns, is that it's putting a lot of pressure on both those teams when it probably wouldn't have, right? Like, nobody's had that guaranteed money, the fully guaranteed. And now those are big questions for Jackson and especially Burrow. I mean, how do you not offer Burrow that kind of a contract with how he's played and taken him to at least 1 Super Bowl in his first 3 years?
Yeah, the other thing is, though, you got to have the financial wherewithal to put a percentage of that in escrow. And I don't know that the Bengals have that financial wherewithal to do that.
Well, they better figure it out. You can't let Joe Burrow get away. I mean, geez.
Yeah, that without question, that was impressive to say the least, and he's likely not done. Scott Petrak, as always, great stuff. Appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much, Scott.
Thanks, Dave.
Scott Petrick, make sure you check him out. Browns beat reporter from the Elyria Chronicle-Telegram, as well as brownzone.com. That's going to do it for this edition of Sports for CLE. We'll see you back here tomorrow at 4. Have a great night, everybody. See you tomorrow at 4 on Sports for CLE.